It was at the time where the people who were at Riggs were probably, I mean, it was one of the desirable places to get further training in psychoanalytic theory and practice. And I was particularly interested in Erik Erikson and David Rappaport. But it was a fellowship, a postgraduate fellowship for training in psychoanalytically oriented psychotherapy. The people that were there were Robert Knight, who was the director, Erik Erikson, looking at the social aspects of human development. Rappaport was a theoretician like there is no other theoretician in psychoanalytic theory. That made it a very attractive place. The first year was purely doing under supervision psychotherapy with difficult patients. And the second year I spent time with Rappaport studying Piaget, and we went over the origins of intelligence sort of page by page. And it was on the basis of that that when it was time for me to finish my fellowship, he asked me what I wanted to do after it was over, and I said I wanted to do research. Piaget started from direct observations of what babies actually did, and psychoanalysis retroactively tried to infer what had gone on from adults or older children, and yet it had particular views about development which were not in Piaget. I mean, the whole emotional aspect of development, behavioral aspect of development. So what I wanted to do, and Rappaport supported me in this, was to do an integration of those two theories, or rather a comparison and contrasting of those two theories as a basis for doing baby observations. He was interested in intellectual development, sensory-motor theory of development. But I think the critical thing was that for him, there is nothing built, there is a minimum built into the structure of the baby, and the rest is through spontaneous activity on the part of the baby, and it's not put in from, learning theory or stimulus response theory. It was at the time also the ethologists, Tinbergen, Lorenz, and so on, rather than starting with a theory and to find out what actually went on a day-to-day basis in the behavior of babies as they developed, and out of this eventually might emerge a theory, but not to impose a theory on the behavioral observations. Now, you can never start with a blank slate, yeah? There was the book, first book about Piaget and psychoanalysis, that was to compare and contrast their basic assumptions about how development starts and what are the inputs and what is the role of the organism itself in contributing to development. Whereas what was popular at the time was learning theory, which really made the assumption that the child becomes that which is put in from the environment. Yeah? The alternative was it is through acting on the environment that the child develops, the baby develops. There is the learning theory or the sensory stimulus response theory of learning through input. Then there is the notion of preformationism, namely that it's all built in and all it needs is the trigger of the experience, which is in language development, I suppose, Chomsky's notion of deep structures or whatever. And then there's the Piaget notion that it is through constructing that the active child builds its own environment, its own world of ideas, concepts, structures. I think it comes to a natural point for study is in a newborn baby. I mean, if one could, one would go back beyond newborn into the fetus, which people are now doing. But at the time, that was the way to sort out which goes along the Piaget line, which goes along the psychoanalytic line, and whether either of those can really or should even be integrated. I mean, this is what other people have done, is trying to build one great theory. I think each of those theories has its own values, its own merit, but to try to put them together is really weakening both of the theories, and they should stand alone because they touch on one aspect of human development, but putting them together is a kind of weakening both the strength of both theories. At the time, I was very much influenced by ethology, that is Tinbergen, Lorenz. They were trying to find out what are the species-typical behavior patterns, which for them were the built-in ones. Psychoanalysis made assertions about what must happen or what happens to children during those early years and how it influences the adult. But they talked from retrospective reconstructions of what they learned from adult patients. David Rappaport became then my sponsor. Erickson and Rappaport became my sponsors for this scholarship, this fellowship thing. To look at babies, which was then formulated as a plan. You couldn't get very far in Riggs because there were no babies around. I also wanted to get psychoanalytic training with Greta Biebering, who was then in Boston. And so I moved to Boston, but once a month went to Riggs to discuss with Rappaport really my observations, what they might mean from various theoretical perspectives. See, I think this is the crux of the matter. If you start with a particular theory and hold on and make observations fit into that, then you are really biasing what you're seeing constantly. If you cannot start with, because everybody has a theoretical basis to begin with. You cannot start with a blank slate. So you start with a theoretical framework, but any one of them will bias the result. Now, if you take 2 or 3 different theoretical perspectives on the same phenomena of development, then you are not hooked to any one of them. David Rappaport, he was very tough. I came on a Friday afternoon. We started working in the evening of Friday afternoon, worked all day Saturday. I had supper with him and his family on Saturday, worked all day Sunday, and then went home again. And if I wanted to take an hour off, that was a no-no. So that went on for, I think, 4 years or 5 years. And then he died, and I carried on my own. And then Phil Holtzman, a psychologist, and we weren't the first ones, but yeah, all of Rappaport's students at the time were engaged in research of various sorts. So we decided that once a year we would meet in Stockbridge and present our findings, our research, whatever it is, with a very sharp criticism from the whole audience. It was tough going at the time, but it was all done in good spirits and so on. This went on for, well, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years, these meetings we had. But then people started dying or stopping doing research, and then other people were recruited into this group. George Klein joined in the group and so on. Oh, the interesting thing about those meetings was that some went into neurophysiology, some went into psychiatry, some went into psychotherapy research. Somebody started measuring eye movements. Peter Schiller, I think, neurophysiology. And we thought that was just fine. It didn't have to be always about psychoanalysis. And we got people from various disciplines to talk to the group so that we could have a discussion with them. But now it's all become psychoanalysis and it's gone back to the old formats, and I dropped out.